Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, distinguished postgraduate students, esteemed organizational executives, valued colleagues and friends. You're warmly welcome to lecture 3 of the Research Methods Across Disciplines lecture series. The next 2 slides in this lecture provide relevant social media links for the lecture series and information about the series lecturer, Professor Linus Osuagwu. I am Linus Osuagwu, PhD valedictorian, full professor of marketing at Veritas University Abuja in Nigeria, former chair of the Institutional Review Board IRB at American University of Nigeria, Yola, and former pioneer vice chancellor of a university in Nigeria. I bring to this lecture series over 3 decades of experience in teaching, research, and university leadership. I've had the privilege of building academic institutions from the ground up, working as group head at Research International, Lagos, Nigeria, and supervised many postgraduate students in Nigeria, South Africa, Zimbabwe, and Afghanistan, among other places, thereby giving me first-hand experience of the challenges we will discuss in today's lecture. Recall that in lecture 2, we explored research philosophy and paradigms, among other cognate topics. Today, in lecture 3, we turn to research ethics and integrity. My experience as chair of IRB at American University of Nigeria, overseeing research ethics and integrity, informs today's lecture. By the end of this lecture, we will have a clear framework for conducting ethical research that protects participants and upholds academic integrity. So, let's continue our research journey. I urge you to stay curious, stay methodologically rigorous and flexible, and stay contextually relevant. Let's begin. Enjoy. This slide provides information about the entire lecture series. This is Research Methods Across Disciplines, a comprehensive lecture series for postgraduate students and organizational executives. I provided my institutional affiliation, my LinkedIn profile, my Google Scholar profile, and the YouTube channel for the entire lecture series. This slide shows my profile, my academic background, my LinkedIn profile, my Google Scholar profile, my research interests, and my current institutional affiliation address. Once again, welcome to lecture 3. Research ethics is this moral compass of inquiry, the principles that make things credible, publishable, and socially useful. And the key takeaway is that research ethics is not a box to tick. It is the foundation of credible, fundable research and in the global south of community trust. Let's do a self-assessment check here. Why do you think research ethics matters in your discipline and country? By the end of this lecture 3, you will be able to apply the Belmont Principles, which focuses on respect for persons, beneficence, and justice, to your research design, tracing their origin to the abuses of Nuremberg and Tuskegee issues. You will distinguish research misconduct comprising fabrication, falsification, and plagiarism from questionable research practices such as HARKing and HARKing. You will navigate authorship and publication ethics using the ICMGE criteria, the credit taxonomy, and the predatory journal threat that disproportionately targets Global South scholars. You will address ethical challenges of AI and big data using the fair and care principles for equitable data governance. You design culturally appropriate consent for Global South context, drawing on Ubuntu, relational ethics, design research ethics, and the trust code. I want you to note the key literature for lecture 3. Each topic is grounded in the form that it works. We'll review key literature on the next slide. The key literature for this lecture 3 focuses on ethical principles and foundations, research misconduct and questionable practices, open and transparent research, among other issues. The key literature will also focus on authorship and publication ethics, AI, big data and data governance, and Global South and indigenous research ethics. Let's look at the Belmont Principles with regard to ethics. The Belmont report established 3 foundational principles for research with human subjects, born from the abuses exposed at Nuremberg and Tuskegee. And the principles are: Principle 1, respect for person. This principle entails the treatment of research persons as autonomous agents. Informed consent operationalizes this principle. The principle requires that research participants must be fully informed and freely to choose regarding their participation. It also demands special protections for vulnerable groups comprising children, prisoners, and those with diminished capacity who cannot freely make choices. Principle 2 is beneficence. This principle requires maximization of benefits and minimization of harm. The do-good principle in research. It requires formal risk-benefit analysis and continuous monitoring. It addresses the question: are the likely benefits in this research worth the risks? Principle 3 is about justice. This principle requires the distribution of research risks and benefits fairly. Vulnerable populations should not bear the burdens while others reap the benefits. This principle seems to address a long history of exploitation from the Tuskegee syphilis study to colonial extraction of knowledge from Global South communities without benefits to them. There are additional contemporary research ethics principles. Beyond Belmont, integrity frameworks such as the Singapore Statement in research also emphasize honesty, that is, be truthful about research methods, research findings, and research limitations. For example, do not fabricate of very research results. Integrity. As a researcher, you should be consistent, transparent, and accountable at every stage of the research process. Key takeaway at this stage: respect for persons, beneficence, and justice remain the foundation of ethical research globally. Let's give a self-assessment check. Can you apply each Belmont Principles to research you have read or conducted in your discipline? The Nuremberg trials and the Tuskegee syphilis study are two of the most consequential episodes in the history of research ethics. Together, they exposed the extreme exploitation of vulnerable populations and are the primary reason modern safeguards such as IRV, mandatory informed consent, and the Belmont Principles exist today. Though both are cautionary tales of abused power in research, they differ in context, scope, and the principles they violated. Nuremberg produced the Nuremberg Code of 1947 and its demand for voluntary consent. Tuskegee, on the other hand, produced the Belmont Report of 1979, a modern U.S. federal human subjects regulations regarding research. Crucially, the same abuses later reappeared in Global South, Nigeria's Kanu Trovan trial, 1996. The exploitation that gave rise to Southern Africa's Sangold of 2017, India's HPV vaccine trials of 2009, among others. The Nuremberg doctors' trial, what happened? After World War II, an American military tribunal prosecuted 23 leading Nazi physicians and administrators for war crimes and crimes against humanity. 16 of them were convicted and 7 executed. They had performed brutal, often lethal experiments on concentration camp prisoners without any consent. Examples of the experiments: immersion in freezing water to study hypothermia for the top valve. Low pressure chambers simulating high altitude conditions which were frequently fatal. Forced injection of seawater and deliberate infection of malaria and typhoid. Infliction of battlefield type wounds to test sulfur in surgical techniques. Ethical violations. These experiments mentioned treated human beings as expendable materials. Subjects were tortured, mutilated, and killed for military or ideological ends with no consent, no regard for suffering, and no medical benefit to the individuals. What was the outcome? The judge's verdict included the Nuremberg Code of 1947, 10 principles that became the bedrock of modern research ethics. Its first and most important principle is voluntary informed consent in research. The voluntary consent of the human subject is absolutely essential. Research participants must have legal capacity, be free from coercion, and fully understand the risks associated. The code further requires that research yield results for the good of society on pre-animal study, and avoid all unnecessary physical and mental suffering. The Tuskegee syphilis study 1932 to 1972. What happened? The U.S. Public Health Service, working with the Tuskegee Institute, enrolled 600 poor black men in rural Macon County, Alabama. 399 with syphilis and 201 without, to observe the natural history of untreated syphilis over 4 decades. Crucially, by 1947, penicillin was the standard proven cure for syphilis. Yet, researchers actively withheld it and blocked the men from treatment elsewhere, even arranging draft board exemptions. The men were never told their diagnosis. They were told they had bad blood, were paid in free meals, transport, but never a cure. Ethical violations associated with this. A case of profound exploitation, racism, and deception. Deception and lack of consent. The men were lied to about their diagnosis and the studies through aim or purpose. Withholding treatment. A proven cure was denied even after 1947, causing preventable deaths, blindness, and neurological damage. By the end, more than 100 men had died and dozens of wives and children were infected. Targeting a vulnerable population. The study preyed on impoverished, low-literacy black sharecroppers who trusted a government promise of free care. The associated outcome. Whistleblower Peter Blockstone and the 1972 Associated Press report ended the study. A 1974 case action led by attorney Fred Gay won $10 million settlement, and in 1997 President Clinton issued national apology on this issue. This legacy is the creation of strict federal regulations for human subjects protection, the common rule. This requires every U.S. research institution to have an RFB that reviews all studies involving human subjects. It mandates that vulnerable research populations such as prisoners, children, pregnant women, and economically disadvantaged individuals to receive specific enhanced protection. It also establishes the principle that the welfare of the research participant must always take precedence over the interests of science or society. Summary about the Nuremberg trials and the Tuskegee syphilis study. The slide being shown has 3 columns comprising feature Nuremberg 1940s and Tuskegee 1932 to 1972. With regard to primary violation, for Nuremberg, brutality and torture, lethal experiments on camp prisoners, 23 doctors tried, 7 executed. With regard to Tuskegee, deception and neglect, 600 men enrolled, a proven cure withheld for 40 years. The core issues for Nuremberg was ideological racism and militaristic cruelty. The core issue for Tuskegee was systemic racism and profound paternalism. Key ethical breach for Nuremberg was involuntary participation and sadistic methods. For Tuskegee, was failure to inform, failure to treat, and targeting of racial minorities. The legacy for the Nuremberg was the Nuremberg Code, which established that voluntary consent is absolutely essential in research. The legacy from the Tuskegee was the Belmont Report, which established principles of respect for persons, beneficence, and justice. The connection of these to the Kanu-Trovan trial discussed fully later in Lecture 3. The Kanu-Trovan trial, Kanu in Nigeria, 1996, is often called Nigeria's Tuskegee because it repeats the same disturbing parallels, comprising exploitation of a vulnerable low-literacy population during a deadly meningitis epidemic, failure to obtain valid informed consent from parents in a language many did not understand, withholding the best proven treatment, that is free ceftriaxone offered by Medicine Sans Frontiers in the same compound in favor of an unapproved experimental drug. Overseas researchers imposing a protocol on disadvantaged community that would have been unacceptable in their own base countries. In short, Nuremberg taught that consent must be voluntary, fair, and informed. Tuskegee taught that subjects must never be deceived or denied treatment, and the Kanu issue taught that it should apply equally, or the experiences should apply equally across the globe, not only in the global north or south. Informed consent is the cornerstone of ethical research and rests on three elements. Element 1 is about information. This means that research participants must be told about the purpose of the study, the procedures involved, associated potential risks and benefits, confidentiality protections, right to withdraw at any time without penalty, and contact information for questions. Element 2 is about comprehension. The researcher should present information in plain language suited to the research participant. The researcher should avoid jargon and use the participant's preferred language. For low literacy participants, the researcher should use oral consent with an impartial witness. With regard to the element of voluntariness, consent must be freely given without coercion or undue influence. This matters most in community-based research where researcher, participant, and allied community power gaps can create some pressure. Let's discuss informed consent adaptation for global South research. These include oral consent with an impartial witness for low literacy of populations. Number 2, community consent alongside individual consent, reflecting Ubuntu relational ethics. I am because we are. Number 3, translation and back translation of consent forms into local languages and idioms. And number 3, use of visual aids to explain abstract concepts such as randomization or blood sampling. Let's discuss informed consent with regard to research in action. We're focusing on adapting a consent and measurement tool in Nigeria. A teaching hospital sought to use a global North patient satisfaction measurement scale. The team translated the scale into local dialects, removed irrelevant items such as satisfaction with car parking, and revalidated the adapted scale on a small pilot sample. For research participants with limited literacy, consent was obtained orally before a witness. The lesson from this is that research instruments and consent processes must be culturally and linguistically revalidated, not simply imported from the global north. The key takeaway for now: informed consent is a process in research, not a form. Research participants must genuinely understand what they agree to. Let's take a self-assessment check. How would you obtain informed consent from a research participant with limited literacy in your research context and discipline? Let's discuss research misconduct comprising a fabrication, falsification, and plagiarism. Research misconduct takes three major forms in research. These include fabrication, falsification, and plagiarism. In a particular meta-analysis research, about 2% of scientists admitted fabricating or falsifying data at least once. As stated, the major forms of fabrication, falsification, and plagiarism are explained below. Number one, fabrication. Fabrication is inventing research data that were never collected. It is the gravest form of research misconduct. Let's give an example. A researcher reports surveying 500 participants, but the responses were produced by a random number generator and no one was ever contacted. 2. Falsification is manipulating research data to obtain a desired research result by altering, omitting, or trimming data points. Let's give an example. Selectively deleting research data outliers so that a non-significant result crosses the p less than 0.05 threshold. Number 3 is plagiarism, which is using another person's work, words, or ideas without attribution in research. Let's give an example. Copying a paragraph from a source without citation, or presenting another's idea as your own. The consequences of research misconduct are severe and often lead to career ending. Specific consequences of research misconduct include retraction of public papers, which is currently tracked publicly by Retraction Watch, among others. Loss of funding, meaning ineligibility for future research grants. Institutional sanctions, such as suspension or termination. Reputational and career destruction. Many offenders of misconduct may never work in the academia again. Legal liability in some instances, lawsuits or criminal charges. Key takeaway here is that fabrication, falsification, and plagiarism are the three cardinal sins of research. Researchers are advised to avoid them absolutely in their research works. Let's make a self-assessment check. Can you distinguish fabrication from falsification with an example from your own discipline? The next one we want to discuss is questionable research practices. Questionable research practices exist between good practice and outright fraud. Because they are common, their cumulative damage to the literature may exceed that of fraud. This may lead to what we call cumulative nonsense in the literature. Common questionable research practices include p-hacking, which is running analysis many times until something reaches significance. Number 2 is hacking, meaning hypothesizing after results are known, which means presenting post hoc research findings as a priori research hypothesis. The third one is cherry picking, which means reporting only research results that support your hypothesis. The fourth one is underreporting, which means omitting some research analysis, conditions, or outcomes. The fifth one is data dredging, which means fishing for patterns with no prior research hypothesis. Let's discuss the strategies for preventing questionable research practices, and these include, number 1, pre-registration. We advise that you publicly record your research design, hypothesis, and analysis plan before collecting data. This helps to block hacking and p-hacking. Number 2, register reports. We advise that you submit your research question and methods for peer review before data collection. The journal may commit to publishing your research regardless of subsequent outcome. Number 3 is transparent reporting. We advise that you follow guidelines such as CONSORT for trials and PRISMA for literature reviews. Number 4 is open data and code. We advise that you share your research material so that others can reproduce or replicate. Some key takeaways here. Questionable research practices may not be outright fraud, but they erode trust in the literature. Prevention through transparency beats after the fact remediation, so avoid questionable research practices. Self-assessment check here. Have you ever engaged in a questionable research practice in your discipline? How would you prevent it in future research engagements? Let's discuss research authorship and publication ethics. Authorship confers both credit and accountability. The International Committee of Medical Journal Editors, ICMJE, sets the criteria regarding how medical research should be written, reviewed, and published. The ICMJE authorship criteria include all of the following. Number 1, substantial contribution to conception, that is research conception, design or acquisition, analysis, interpretation of data, and number 2, drafting or critically revising the research work for important intellectual content, and number 3, final approval of the version of the research to be published, and number 4, accountability for all aspects of the research work. Let's discuss unethical research authorship practices. These include, number 1, ghost authorship. In this, a substantial contributor, often an industry writer, is left off. Number 2, gift or honorary authorship. In this, someone is listed despite no substantial contribution. Number 3, guest authorship. In this, a prestigious name is added to boost the research paper's chances. These unethical research authorship practices are widespread under publish or perish pressure, including in many global South indices, where senior staff are sometimes added by default. Let's discuss credit, that is contributory roles taxonomy. Credit was developed by Brand, Allen and Allman and colleagues 2015 and now used by many journals. Credit has the following 14 transparent rules: conceptualization, data curation, formal analysis, funding acquisition, investigation, methodology, project administration, resources, software, supervision, validation, visualization, writing of original draft, and writing with regard to review and editing. Credit makes each person's exact contribution visible, thereby reducing disputes associated with authorship. Some key takeaways here. Research authorship is earned, not gifted. Therefore, every research author must be able to defend the work and account for its integrity. Let's make a self-assessment check. Have you ever been added as a guest author or added someone as a gift author in research in your discipline? Ponder over this. Now let's discuss ethical challenges of AI and big data in research. AI and big data create new ethical challenges in research. These challenges include challenge 1, algorithmic bias. Models trained on biased data reproduce and amplify that bias, thereby entrenching discrimination. Let's give an example. Amazon scrapped an AI hiring tool that downgraded women's CVs because the model learned from a male-dominated history. Also in the global South, credit scoring and facial recognition models trained on global North data routinely misclassify local users. Challenge 2, privacy and data protection. Big data often contains personal information, and even anonymized data can be re-identified by combining multiple anonymous data sets. Let's give an example. Age, gender, and location together can uniquely identify individuals when multiple anonymous data sets are combined. Laws such as AU Malabo Convention, Nigeria's NDPA, that is Nigeria Data Protection Act of 2023, and Kenya's Data Protection Act 2019 now govern such data to ensure data privacy protections. Challenge 3, interpretability. Deep learning black boxes cannot explain their predictions, thereby undermining accountability. Let's give an example. An AI model flags a loan applicant as being risky, but cannot explain the reason for flagging him or her. Challenge number 4 is reproducibility. Much of AI research cannot be reproduced because code, data, and model settings are not shared. Let's give an example. A research team announces an AI breakthrough, but withholds the relevant code, thereby making independent verification of the breakthrough impossible. This challenge is acute in the Global South context, where limited compute access, that is, permission to run software, algorithms, or queries on the servers where the data lives, and data access, that is, permission to view, read, or extract the actual code, widen the distance between claims, which others can check. Remedies for these challenges: the fair and care principles. The fair principle requires that research data should be findable, accessible, interpretable, and reusable. The care principle requires that for indigenous and community research data, researchers should add collective benefits, authority to control, responsibility, and ethics. FAIR makes data open, while CARE ensures openness does not repeat extraction. Together, the FAIR and CARE principles guide equitable data governance as applied by Africa's H3 Genomics Consortium. The H3 Africa Consortium, the largest coordinated program of human genomic research on the African continent, spanning 10,000s of samples across dozens of African countries, shows how the FAIR and CARE principles work together in practice. FAIR, that is findable, accessible, interpretable, reusable, makes data openly shareable. Share, on the other hand, comprising collective benefit, authority to control, responsibility, and ethics, ensures openness does not become extraction. H3 Africa operationalizes CARE through African scientific leadership, community engagement, and benefit sharing. Its Data and Biospecimen Access Committee, that is the DBAC, governs who may reuse samples collected under broad consent, thereby deciding on participants' behalf long after the original study ends. The lesson is that ethical research demands more than accessibility. It demands the capacity, governance, and partnership that data serves the people it comes from. Some key takeaways here. AI and big data amplify existing ethical challenges rather than creating wholly new ones. The FAIR and CARE principles still apply. However, they are simply harder to enforce, especially in the Global South. Let's make a self-assessment check here. How would you dictate and address algorithmic bias in research in your discipline? Let's discuss ethical considerations in Global South research. Research in the Global South carries additional ethical layers. These include, number one, multiple approvals. IRB clearance is rarely enough. As a researcher, you may also need national or district head office approval and community assent via traditional leaders, village heads, or clergy. Number two, community consent. In collectivist settings associated with the Global South, individual consent alone is insufficient. Would the Ubuntu ethics operate here? Number three, benefit sharing. Research communities, not just researchers, should also gain from the research as formalized by the Nagoya Protocol of 2014 and the San Code of Research Ethics 2017. Avoid helicopter research, or what is called parachute research. As a researcher, resist flying in to research locations to extract data with no local partnership. The Global Code of Conduct, now known as Trust Code, is a landmark framework launched in the European Parliament in 2018 to prevent ethics dumping, that is, conducting research in the Global South that will be prohibited in the Global North. It is coordinated by Doris Kuda's EU-funded Trust project and was built directly with vulnerable communities in mind: the San people of Southern Africa and sex workers in Nairobi, Kenya, shifting from mere protection of vulnerable populations to genuine partnership with them. The European Commission adopted it in 2018 as the first funder to do so, and the University of Cape Town became the first university worldwide to adopt it. The four core values of the Trust Code. The Trust Code rests on four principles for equitable research partnership, and these include: number one, fairness. Research must be locally relevant, involve local researchers, and share benefits fairly. This involves data ownership, authorship, and capacity building. Number two of the Trust Code. Researchers are advised to obtain local ethics review and community consent and respect local customs and decision making. The San Code was its first affiliated success. Number three of the Trust Code. Researchers should protect participants from stigma, apply the higher of local or international standards, and make complex procedures genuinely accessible. Number four, honesty. Researchers should communicate plainly across languages, disclose funding and risks, and refuse bribery as shortcuts. Let's discuss the San Code of Research Ethics, issued by South African Sun Institute. It is the first research ethics code created and published by an indigenous people in Africa. According to its authors, the Sun had been bombarded by researchers for decades. It was never a question of stopping research, but of doing it right. This catalyst was a 2010 genomic study in Nature that sequenced the genomes of four elderly San men in Namibia. Though legally approved, the researchers bypassed San leaders, relied on inadequate verbal consent, and published supplementary conclusions the community found private, pejorative, discriminatory, and inappropriate, thereby treating research participants as objects rather than partners. There are associated further cases regarding indigenous and marginalized communities. The Havasupai tribe in USA 1990 to 2004, in this blood giving for diabetes research was reused without consent for stigmatizing studies. A 2010 settlement returned the samples and paid $700,000. This was a landmark for indigenous data sovereignty. The other one is Henrietta Lacks, also in US 1951. HeLa cells were taken without consent from a black woman and of medical breakthroughs. Her family settled only in 2023, a touchstone for benefit sharing. Like the Code and Care Principles, these two cases show that consent, benefit sharing, and community control are universal concerns, not only global issues, for global South issues. The core principles of the Code. The Code is built on 4 central values. Number 1, respect. For the whole community and its culture, not only individuals. Consulting leaders in advance, protecting community privacy, acknowledging contributions, and never assuming automatic approval. Honesty, which involves open, non-academic communication with full transparency about a study's purpose, funding, and potential harms, so that consent is genuinely informed. The third one is justice and fairness, which entails that meaningful, sound involvement and a fair share of benefits co-created involving co-research, skills, or income. The code can withdraw cooperation from researchers who break faith. Number 4 is care, which entails that research must match local needs and leaders and leads to something that is positive. Avoid patronizing low research ethics and maintaining high scientific standards. Let's look at research in action. A multi-layered ethical review. A study of HIV prevention behavior in rural Malawi required, in sequence, the following. Number 1, University Research Ethics Committee approval. Number 2, District Head Office approval. Number 3, community approval through village headmen. Number 4, individual consent, oral for those with low literacy and written for literate persons. Number 5, benefit sharing, involving free health screening for all research participants. Let's make a research contrast. The Kanu-Trovan trial in Nigeria, 1996, shows the cost of skipping these research layers or steps. The Kanu-Trovan trial in Nigeria, 1996, is one of the most instructive cases in modern research ethics. During a catastrophic meningitis epidemic that killed some 12,000 people, the US pharmaceutical company Pfizer flew a 6-person team into Kano, Nigeria to test an unapproved oral antibiotic Trovan on 200 critically ill children. It is now a textbook example of ethics dumping, that is, exploiting weaker regulatory oversight in a global South country to run a study that would not have been permitted in the sponsor's home country. It led to a landmark lawsuit, a major settlement and a lasting damage to public trust. The major associated ethical violations. A Nigerian federal panel of medical experts investigated the trial and concluded that it was an illegal trial of an unregistered drug and a clear case of exploitation of the ignorant. The panel found that Pfizer had no valid Nigerian regulatory approval, that the trial breached the Declaration of Helsinki, and that the required ethics approval letter was produced only after the fact. The primary violations examined next span consent, oversight, scientific conduct, and exploitation of a public health emergency. The issues involved here are, number one, falsified ethical approval. The Hospital Ethics Committee approval letter was backdated by the lead Nigerian investigator and used to satisfy US regulators, yet the hospital had no ethics committee at the time. Number two, lack of informed consent. Families were not told their children were in an experiment, nor that free proven treatment using the drug was available from Medicine Sans Frontiers in the same building. Consent was, at best, verbal and in a language many patients did not fully understand. Number three, questionable scientific conduct. The trial continued as children deteriorated and the control group received deliberately reduced dose for the drug, allegedly to make Trovan appear more effective. Number four, exploitation of a crisis. Pfizer experimented on ill children during an emergency and left once the study ended, while the epidemic still raged. Consequences and aftermath of this case. The trial's repercussions were significant and lasting. And these include, number one, deaths and injuries. 11 children died, 5 on Trovan, 6 on comparator, and others were left blind, deaf, paralyzed, or brain damaged. Number two, legal and financial settlement. In Abdullahi versus Pfizer, the family sued under the U.S. Alien Tort Statute. Pfizer settled in 2009 for about $75 million. The $35 million victims fund at roughly $175,000 per deceased child, $30 million for Kanu healthcare, and $10 million in costs. Number three, drug withdrawal. Trovan was never approved for children, was severely restricted in the US, and was banned in Europe over fatal liver toxicity. Number four, damage to public trust. The scandal deepened of Western medicine and is linked to 2003 to 2009 of polio vaccination in northern Nigeria, which relieved outbreaks. Significance of the Trovan trial for research ethics. The Trovan trial is a powerful cautionary tale because it shows why rigorous ethical review, genuinely informed consent, and protection of vulnerable populations matter most in research, not least in the international and crisis context. It proves that ethical standards must be universal, not relative to location. This means that justice and respect for persons cannot be suspended because a community is poor, of low literacy, or in the middle of an emergency. Together with Tuskegee, Nuremberg, the SAM case, and India's 2009 HPV trials, Kanu Trovan anchors the Consequences behind the Trust Code 2018. That is partnership, benefit sharing, and equal protection for the Global South. Ethical challenges in Global South research are rooted in power imbalances, institutional pressure, and colonial legacies that shape how knowledge is produced, shared, and valued. Genuine ethics must move beyond administrative compliance to confront structural injustice, positionality in research, and the question of who ultimately benefits from the research. The ethical mandate for organizations in the Global South is to be fair and care, thereby using both sets of principles to build data ecosystems that are both globally useful and locally relevant and just. We have some literature supports regarding ethical considerations in the Global South research. We've listed them: Smith, and we have issues pertaining to helicopter or parachute research, which involves extracting data without local co-authorship or capacity building. And this persists and is countered by equitable partnership models in some instances. We also have the issue of sound data governance. Sound data governance combines fair principles with care principles. Thereby enabling research communities to be in control of their research data. We have examples from the Global South, and these are the Sound Code of Research Ethics, South Africa 2017 is the first ethics code authored by an African indigenous community, and is built on respect, honesty, justice, and care after a century of extractive data study. The other one is the H3 Africa. It is a Pan-African genomics continuum with more than 500 researchers, which built local biobanks, consent standards, and governance led from the African continent. The other example, as have been discussed, is the Trojan Kanu case, the Pfizer-Trovan meningitis trial in Kano, Nigeria. The other one is the Trust Global Code of Conduct. It is an equitable framework created to handle ethical issues, among others. We have provided a source for these examples. So far, let's note some key takeaways. One is that ethical review in the Global South means going beyond the ethical checklist. It requires, in addition, understanding local power dynamics and building trust with relevant research communities and gatekeepers. We give a self-assessment check here. How would you obtain community consent in research in your discipline and context? For executives, organizational research on customers or employees needs its own ethics discipline. Some organizational research ethics checklists include questions such as: number one, is the research clearly defined and purposeful? Number two, is there informed consent from customers or employees? Number three, Is the research data protected, meaning issues pertaining to privacy, security, or retention? Number 4. Is the research purpose transparent? Number 5. Do research participants benefit? Number 6. Can research participants withdraw their data after collection? Number 7. Is there IRB or Research Ethics Committee oversight for the studies involving people? Let's give executive summary here. Ethical lapses in research, AI or data destroy trust fast. Therefore, executives are advised to establish an internal organizational ethics review board for any study involving customers or employees, because one violation can destroy organizational reputation built over time. The Cambridge Analytica's misuse of Facebook data in 2018 is a cautionary benchmark. Let's make a self-assessment check. Does the organization have an ethics review process for research involving customers or employees? Let's look at the thesis or dissertation connection for lecture 3. As a postgraduate researcher, you are advised to secure IRB REC approval, draft consent forms, and document data protection early in your thesis. This is because examiners and journals both scrutinize relevant issues relating to research ethics. The ethics section checklist for postgraduate students may include: number 1, IRB REC approval obtained. Quote the approval number. Check whether informed consent has been developed and context appropriate determined. Check whether data protection measures have been documented. Check whether confidentiality procedures have been described. Check whether research participants' rights with regard to withdrawal of feedback have been addressed. Check whether benefit sharing has been described, if applicable. And check whether community consent has been obtained, if applicable. The key takeaway here for postgraduate students is that ethics in research is not afterthought. It should be designed into the study from the first draft of your research proposal. Let's give a self-assessment check. Does your thesis or dissertation include a comprehensive ethics section? Let's test your understanding of the issues discussed so far in lecture 3. Which Belmont principle requires that research risks and benefits be distributed fairly? We think it's justice. Question 2. Making up research data that was never collected is an example of, we think it's an example of fabrication. Question 3. Which authorship issue occurs when a significant research contributor is not listed as an author? We think it's ghost authorship. Question 4. Is it true or false that AI can be listed as a co-author on a research paper? We think this is false because most journals prohibit, for now, AI authorship. Question 5. In global South research context, what additional ethical consideration is often required? We think it's community consent in addition to individual consent. We want to give you skill builder exercise. And the task is: draft a one-page informed consent form for a study in your discipline and context. In the consent form, we want you to include purpose, procedures, risks and benefits, confidentiality, right to withdraw, and contact information, and where relevant, a benefit sharing statement and community consent step. The key takeaway is that a well-designed consent form protects both research participants and researchers. We want to summarize Lecture 3. In Lecture 3, we discussed, number 1, the Belmont Principles comprising respect for persons, beneficence, and justice. Number 2, we discussed research misconduct and questionable research practices. We also discussed authorship and publication ethics, focusing on ICMGA criteria and credit. Number 4, we also examined ethical challenges of AI and big data, which can be remedied by fair and care principles. We also discussed culturally grounded ethics for Global South researchers, including community consent, benefit sharing, and the SAN code. We want you to note some research terms or concepts for Lecture 3. One is the Belmont Principles, which focuses on respect for persons, beneficence, and justice as ethical foundation for research. We also want you to note informed consent, which is voluntary informed agreement to participate in research extended in global research context through community consent and benefit sharing. We want you to know research misconduct comprising fabrication, falsification, and plagiarism, the most serious breaches of research integrity. We want you to note questionable research practices comprising HARKing, and selective reporting, gray area behaviors that erode credibility in research. We want you to note authorship and publication ethics, the ICMG criteria, and the credit taxonomy. Avoiding ghost, gift, and guest authorship. We want you to note AI and big data ethics with regard to privacy, bias, and consent challenges. And this can be addressed via the fair and care principles. We want you to know Global South considerations, including culturally grounded ethics, community consent, benefit sharing, and the SAN code of research ethics. We want to preview Lecture 4. In Lecture 4, we will examine the practical challenges of conducting research in the Global South and how to overcome them, from funding and infrastructure to data sovereignty, among others. We want to stay curious, to stay methodologically rigorous yet flexible, and stay contextually relevant. Let's continue the research journey. Thank you.